where those decisions have subsequently been made public, nor have I quoted what ministers said at those meetings, except in relation to discussions on Brexit, which were extensively leaked by many of the participants. I've drawn on such coverage, giving a particularly full account of two crucial meetings: the meeting in July 2018 that agreed the Chequers proposals, and the meeting in November 2018 that agreed the deal. Details of both were leaked and dissected in the press. And fourth, when I've quoted other heads of government, I've been more relaxed about revealing what those who have since stood down from public office said than those who are still in post. Theresa's key job as Prime Minister was to deliver Brexit, and she failed. However much time passes, that will always be the first line in any judgment on her premiership. But subsequent events have led to a reappraisal of what she was trying to achieve. The disagreement between her and Boris Johnson over Brexit boiled down to a philosophical difference and four arguments on which we can now reach a conclusion. The philosophical difference concerned compromise. Theresa's view was that the referendum result was clear but close, and that two of the four nations of the UK had voted to remain. So while we should leave, we should have a close relationship with the EU after we had left. Boris rejected any idea of compromise. If you didn't break completely free of the EU, he said, there was no point leaving. The first argument was about whether leaving the European Union without a deal was a good outcome. Boris thought it was, or at least claimed to. Theresa's position was that while you have to be prepared to walk away from any negotiation if the proposed deal isn't good enough, leaving without a deal would not be a good outcome economically. But of greater concern to her was the risk that it could lead to the breakup of the UK, given the opposition to it in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Second, setting aside the argument about whether no deal was a good policy, was it a viable one? If the government tried to leave without a deal, would Parliament block it? Boris believed that if the party was led by someone who supported leaving without a deal, those in cabinet and on the backbenches who opposed it would fall into line. You could unite the parliamentary party and, with support from the DUP and a few Labour leavers, win a vote. However, Theresa thought that those who opposed no deal felt just as strongly on one side of the argument as Boris did on the other. Third, would the threat of leaving without a deal force the EU to shift its position? Boris believed that it would. Theresa was much more sceptical, in part because the EU had less to lose from no deal than the UK, but mainly because they didn't regard it as a credible threat, given the parliamentary arithmetic and the Speaker John Bercow's willingness to bend parliamentary conventions. Fourth, if Parliament remained gridlocked, was going back to the country a credible strategy? Could the Conservative Party win a general election without having delivered Brexit? Boris was confident that he could. Theresa, coloured by her experience in 2017, was more sceptical. We now know who was right on at least three of these questions. Boris Johnson was unable to force through no deal, thanks to the opposition of 21 Conservative MPs, including 5 members of Theresa's cabinet: Philip Hammond, David Gauke, Greg Clark, Rory Stewart and Caroline Nokes. In retaliation, he withdrew the whip from them and prevented some of them from standing as Conservative candidates at the election he was forced to call, effectively ending their political careers. Their ministerial experience, and that of others such as Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt and Julian Smith, who he is exiled to the backbenches, was sadly missed as the government struggled to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. The threat of leaving without a deal when Boris became Prime Minister did not extract any meaningful concession from the EU. Despite all the talk from his chief negotiator David Frost about how the May government had blinked at key moments, the truth is that the deal Boris agreed was 95% Theresa's deal, with the 5% that was new involving a concession by the UK. Boris went back to what the EU had wanted all along: special arrangements for Northern Ireland that created a partial border within our own country. At the time, Boris hailed his deal as a triumph and denied that it meant a partial border down the Irish Sea. But the government was subsequently forced to admit that it would mean increased checks when goods moved from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Indeed, it turned out that what had been a great deal in the run-up to the December 2019 election was so problematic the following September that the government attempted to pass legislation to override parts of it in domestic law, doing grave damage to the UK's international reputation in the process. And now that the protocol is in partial operation, the effect is clear, both in terms of the difficulties it's causing businesses and the political unrest it's provoked. Things will be even worse if it is ever fully applied.